If I had known that a single photograph could carve straight through a man's chest, I might have braced myself before opening the message. But I didn't. And when the image appeared on my screen, my entire family gathered for the Christmas dinner they told me was canceled. I felt something in me collapse, slow and heavy, like an old bridge giving way after decades of weathering storms. My name is Gregory Harris, and I have lived through enough winters to believe I understood the nature of people, especially my own kin. Yet nothing in all my 70 years prepared me for the quiet, expertly disguised cruelty my family delivered that night. If you're listening to this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. To appreciate the weight of that betrayal, you need to understand that Christmas Eve has always been my anchor. Ever since my grandchildren, Lily and Mason, came into this world, our family tradition was simple. On the night before Christmas, we sat beneath the warm glow of lantern-style lights in my son Michael's home, shared roast, exchanged stories, and laughed until our sides ached. 3 generations under one roof, an unbroken chain of memory. This year was meant to be no different. At dawn, while the city of Milwaukee still slept beneath its fresh layer of snow, I rose as I always do. Old bodies rarely indulge in sleeping late, but I never minded. The morning felt promising. I laid out the gifts I had wrapped in deep green foil, the same shade I chose every year since Lily was born. I polished my shoes, brushed my coat, and even selected a burgundy tie my late wife adored. I wanted to look dignified for the family photos they always insisted on taking. On my dining table sat a vintage bottle of Mountain Region red wine aged since the late 1990s that I had been saving for a decade. I imagined the way Lily's eyes would sparkle when she opened her music kit, or how Mason would practically bounce off the floor when he saw the model train set he'd been mentioning for months. The anticipation warmed my chest. Around late morning, while I adjusted my collar in the hallway mirror, my phone lit up with Michael's name. I smiled without thinking. Surely he was calling to confirm the menu or tell me the kids were counting the hours until my arrival. But his voice, steady, controlled, and far too quiet, sent a ripple of unease down my spine. "Dad," he began, "I've got unfortunate news." The pause that followed dragged longer than it needed to, as though he were choosing his word from a script written by someone else. He told me that his wife Jenna's father had suffered a sudden medical scare. They had taken him to the hospital earlier that morning, and Jenna was devastated. Christmas Eve dinner, he said, would have to be canceled. A hollow space opened up inside me. I asked if I could help, if they needed anything, if Jenna was stable. Michael assured me that doctors expected a full recovery, but insisted they were in no condition to celebrate. His tone was so composed, so rehearsed, that I mistook it for responsibility rather than deception. Of course, I told him I understood. When someone's health falters, celebrations take second place. Life has taught me many lessons, and one of them is that compassion must override tradition. So I wished them well, sent my love, and ended the call, never imagining that on the other side of that phone was a carefully woven lie. The rest of the day unfolded quietly. My house, usually alive with the rustling of wrapping paper and the giggles of my grandchildren, felt strangely hollow. Still, I tried to keep my spirits steady. I prepared a modest dinner for myself and uncorked that treasured bottle of wine. After all, there was no reason to let it gather dust for another year. I toasted silently to Jenna's father's recovery and hoped that next Christmas would restore what this one seemed to take away. But the universe had a different plan. What happened next shattered the foundation of trust one believed unbreakable. And without knowing it, my family had awakened a part of me I had not touched since the earliest, hardest years of building my company, my strategic, unyielding side. The part of me that does not let betrayal pass quietly. Later that night, long after the last embers in my fireplace faded into quiet orange threads, I found myself scrolling through my phone simply to distract the mind. The house was too silent, the kind of silence that presses on the ribs and makes every room feel a little larger and a little emptier than before. I opened the social app one only learned to use because Lily loves posting videos of her doodles and music practice. It has become my window into their young lives, tiny, moving glimpses of a world that seems to run faster every year. And then, as casually as a snowflake landing on a sleeve, it appeared, a photograph, posted barely 2 hours earlier. At first, my eyes refused to believe the shapes they were seeing. I blinked once, twice. My breath caught. There they were, my entire family smiling, glowing beneath warm garlands of amber light, seated around a grand table dressed in silver and plum colors. A feast, a celebration, a Christmas Eve dinner. The Christmas dinner that, according to my son, had been canceled. In the center of the image stood Jenna's father, the man I'd been told was bedridden in a hospital, laughing so hard his cheeks glowed ruby. To his right, my daughter Rachel lifted her glass. Beside her, her husband Owen leaned in with a grin stretched ear to ear. And near the far end of the table were Lily and Mason, both wearing sparkly green sweaters, their faces bright with joy. And my son, Michael, my own flesh and blood, held the camera at arm's length, smiling with the ease of someone who has nothing to hide. Except he had hidden everything. Under the picture, in Lily's cheerful handwriting, was the caption, "Best Christmas ever. All of us together." Grandpa Raymond told the funniest stories. Perfect family night. Perfect family night. All of us together. Except me. My hand trembled so violently the phone nearly slipped from my palm. A ringing sensation grew inside my ears, the kind that comes when the heart tries to beat faster than the body can manage. The room seemed to tilt just slightly, as if my equilibrium had decided to step away for a moment. I whispered aloud without meaning to, Why would they do this? I enlarged the photo, letting my eyes study every fraction of it with the scrutiny of a man searching for some logical explanation, some sign that maybe this had been taken years ago, or that someone had mislabeled it. But the clues mocked me. The table was set for exactly 9 places. 9 chairs, 9 plates, 9 crystal glasses glinting under the lights. 9 people, just enough for each member of the family. A perfect count of attendance. Except they had planned for 9, even though, if the dinner truly included me, the table would have required 10 settings. They had calculated my absence beforehand. The decorations gave them away, too. Those golden garland lights were the same ones I had helped Michael choose earlier that month at the Winter Crafts Fair. He had insisted he wanted the house to feel extra festive this year. I had paid for half of them, happy to contribute to the holiday spirit. And I recognized the embroidered table runner deep burgundy with threads of copper because I had given it to Jenna as a housewarming gift 3 years back. Everything in the photo screamed home, the home I was supposed to be welcome in, and yet I had been cast out deliberately, like an outdated ornament shoved to the back of the attic. I watched a short video clip Lily had posted next. Her giggles echoed through my living room as Jenna's father cracked a joke. Laughter exploded around the table, real, unrestrained, festive laughter. The kind families share when no tension lingers in the air. The kind of laughter reserved for moments untouched by lies. That was when the first tears slipped down my cheek, not from sadness, but from something far heavier. Sadness is gentle. This was not gentle. This was a wound sliced into an old heart already softened by time. Humiliation. That was the name of the feeling clamping around my chest. Humiliation followed by a deeper sting, awareness. A slow dawn of realization that this was not an accident, nor a misunderstanding, nor a last-minute change of plans. This had been orchestrated, planned, executed with precision. I closed my eyes, replaying Michael's call, the calculated pauses, the strangely neutral tone, the phrases that now sounded rehearsed. I saw again how quickly he had dismissed my offer to help, how firmly he insisted that no one had the spirit to celebrate. Yet there they were celebrating without the slightest trace of sorrow. Piece by piece, the lie unraveled. Piece by piece, a colder truth emerged. For many years, my family had grown increasingly dependent on me financially, emotionally, in ways I had convinced myself were natural. I helped them because I loved them. But perhaps I had crossed some invisible line, one they silently resented until resentment twisted into something darker. I stared again at the final frame of the video. The entire family in a circle, arms raised, glasses touching. A toast. A toast in a night they swore did not exist. My jaw tightened. My spine straightened. I felt something inside me shift slow at first, like frozen earth cracking in early spring. The grief did not disappear, but it condensed, hardened, transformed into something sharp and useful. Resolve. You see, a man who has survived 7 decades learns a few things about betrayal. He learns that silence can be more powerful than shouting. He learns that patience is a weapon. And he learns that when people mistake kindness for weakness, they eventually push too far. And my family pushed too far that night. When I stood up from my armchair, my knees did not shake from age, they trembled from the rising conviction that I would not let this wound end as simple heartbreak. No, this would become the beginning of a reckoning they never anticipated. A reckoning they earned. I did not sleep that night, not for even a breath of a moment. Some men lose sleep from worry, others from heartache. Mine slipped away because revelation has a strange way of jolting the senses awake. Once truth flicks on its light, there is no returning to darkness. I lay in bed staring at the faint cracks in my ceiling, cracks I had never noticed before. Funny how betrayal sharpens the eyes. Every silent second pressed against my ribs, urging me to replay the days, weeks, and months leading to this Christmas Eve ambush. And so, like an archivist sorting dusty old files, I mentally reopened everything. First, I remembered a conversation with Michael about 3 weeks before Christmas. We had driven together to choose a fresh pine tree for his living room. It had been snowing that morning, the soft, gentle kind, flakes drifting like feathers from torn pillows in the sky. As we strolled between rows of trees smelling of sap and winter air, Michael began talking about expenses. "Dad," he had said, brushing snow from a branch, "Jenna and I have been thinking a lot about budgeting. Prices keep rising. We really need to tighten things this year." Back then, I had nodded sympathetically. "If you need help, you know I'm here. That is what family does." He had shaken his head too quickly, too pointedly. "It's not just about help. It's evaluating what's necessary. Some traditions might be more cost than value." At the time, I thought he meant holiday travel or unnecessary gifts. But now, after seeing that photograph, I recognized his meaning. The tradition that was costly, the presents that had become unnecessary. Me. Another memory surfaced. Around mid-December, Jenna stopped by my home. An unusual visit. She is courteous and polished, but rarely goes out of her way to speak privately with me. She arrived with a basket of cranberry muffins, wearing her usual soft-spoken smile. I had welcomed her warmly, unaware that beneath her gentleness lived a hidden blade. "I think you know how much I admire your devotion to family," she told me, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "But Michael and I have been wondering if it's time to create our own traditions, just the 4 of us, in a more intimate way." I had smiled, believing I understood. That's natural. Every generation builds its own rhythm. But Jenna's smile did not soften. Not even a little. "We just want space to make decisions without feeling observed or overshadowed." Overshadowed. A word she delivered like a polite slap. Only now, after the Christmas betrayal, I fully understood this was not a conversation. It was a warning. A carefully phrased prelude to my gradual removal. And then there was Rachel, my daughter. 2 days before Christmas Eve, she had called me to confirm what dessert I was bringing. Everything in her tone seemed normal, except for one subtle detail. She kept correcting herself, starting sentences she then quickly revised. "Dad, I hope everything goes according to dash," a pause. I hope dinner runs smoothly. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But in hindsight, her hesitations were cracks in the mask. She had known something. Perhaps not every detail, but enough to feel the weight of it. With each recollection, another stone of truth settled into place, building a structure far different from the family I thought I knew. But the moment that turned my stomach came from weeks earlier, something I had brushed off as merely uncomfortable. I had arrived at Michael's house to pick up some paperwork. The door was slightly ajar, and from inside the kitchen, I heard voices, quiet but tense. the kind of tension that slithers under doors. He cannot keep dictating everything, Jenna's voice whispered. He already had his life. When do we get ours? Michael responded, exasperated. I know, but we need leverage. He won't budge unless he feels pressure. When I walked in and cleared my throat, they switched instantly to discussing casserole recipes. I convinced myself I had imagined the hostility, but I hadn't. Their words now echoed with devastating clarity. Dictating everything. Leverage. Pressure. This wasn't resentment. It was strategy. When the sky began to lighten the pale peach haze before sunrise, I finally sat up, swung my legs over the edge of the bed, and felt the weight of determination settle onto my bones. Hurt had hollowed me out, but clarity filled the hollow spaces with purpose. Breathing deeply, I rose, padded downstairs, and entered my study. I switched on the small brass desk lamp, its glow falling across stacks of documents I had organized earlier that month. Contracts, financial reports, company files. For nearly 5 decades, I built my construction firm from nothing but grit and stubbornness. And in all those years, I learned one universal truth. Numbers never lie, people do. I opened my laptop and accessed the company's accounts. At first glance, everything looked ordinary: payments to suppliers, standard payroll, receipts from clients. But deception lies in the subtle corners, not the obvious entries. In the miscellaneous expenses folder, I found them. 3 invoices from a luxury coastal realty firm. Each invoice paid for with company funds. Each marked for property appraisal services. My breath tightened. I clicked the first invoice, an appraisal of my beachfront condominium in South Carolina. The second, same property, new valuation. The third, once more. Why would Michael need multiple appraisals of my property unless he intended to sell it? And worse, why had he used my business to finance those appraisals? I dug deeper, opening his administrative folder, the one he rarely let anyone touch. But I've always kept a master key for every file cabinet. Not out of mistrust, but habit. A habit that saved me. Inside, I found a folder labeled Private Planning, Confidential. My heartbeat slowed. The room grew impossibly quiet. I opened it. Inside lay the truth. And the truth was a beast with sharp teeth. A preliminary sales contract, my property listed for nearly $500,000. A letter to an estate law specialist inquiring about early transfer of assets when an elder's cognitive clarity shows decline. Notes scribbled in Michael's handwriting. Rachel must testify. Gather evidence of lapses. Doctor verification needed. My own children were mapping out the paperwork to declare me mentally unfit. And beneath those documents was a distribution chart, a tidy list outlining exactly how they planned to divide everything I had built across 7 decades. My estate, my company, my home, my future, all parceled out like items in a yard sale. I sat still for several minutes, letting the betrayal settle into my lungs. Not as suffocation, but as fuel. A slow, steady burn. Because in that moment, I stopped being the grieving father, and I became the strategist I had forgotten I once was. I photographed every page. I refiled everything precisely. Then I sat there, waiting for dawn to fully break, knowing exactly what I would do next. My children thought they knew how far I would bend. They believed age had softened me. They believed kindness made me blind. They were wrong. When the sky finally lightened from indigo to soft pearl, I rose from my chair with the steadiness of a man who had already crossed a threshold. There are moments in life when anger dissolves into clarity, when hurt reshapes itself into purpose. That morning, as the first rays crept across my study, I felt something inside me click into place. This was no longer a matter of disappointment or even sorrow. It was a matter of survival, the survival of my dignity, my legacy, my autonomy. At precisely 6 o'clock, I reached for my phone and dialed the one person who had guided me through every major legal storm of my adult life. Leonard Marshall, my attorney for more than 3 decades. A man whose integrity had never once wavered, even when mine threatened to. The line rang only once before he answered. Gregory, Leonard's voice carried the warmth of an old friend, but also an undercurrent of alertness. Is everything all right? You usually don't call this early. No, Leonard, I said, letting the gravity of my tone speak for itself. Nothing is all right. I need to see you this morning. Immediately. It's urgent. He didn't hesitate. Come to my office in 50 minutes. I'll have coffee ready. When someone has known you for 3 decades, they can hear the tectonic shifts in your voice. Leonard heard mine. I showered, dressed in my charcoal suit, the same one I wore when signing contract that changed the direction of my company, and shaved with slow, deliberate strokes. The ritual steadied me. Every movement felt symbolic, as if I were reclaiming parts of myself that betrayal had tried to scrape away. Driving through Milwaukee's winter streets, I noticed how the snow reflected the morning sun like shards of crushed glass. Cold, brilliant, unforgiving. The perfect backdrop for what needed to happen next. Leonard's office was inside a restored sandstone building across from the river. When I entered, he was already standing behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, 2 steaming mugs on the table. Sit, he said gently. Tell me everything. And so I did. I told him about the canceled dinner, the photograph, the video, the invoices for the property appraisals, the forged authorization in the preliminary sales contract, the letters about mental competency evaluations, Jenna's influence, Michael's resentments, Rachel's quiet cooperation. I spoke for more than 20 minutes without stopping. Leonard listened without a single interruption, but his expression gradually hardened like wet clay drying into stone. When I finished, he allowed a long breath and leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together. Gregory, he said slowly, this is not merely a family dispute. This is deliberate financial manipulation, potential fraud, potential embezzlement, and an evident attempt to undermine your legal agency. Your son crossed into criminal territory. I nodded. I already knew, but hearing it from a lawyer made the truth settle deeper, colder, almost clinical. What are my options? I asked, though part of me already sensed the answer. Leonard straightened. His tone shifted into the precise cadence of a strategist. We have several. First, we freeze every path your son might use to access or liquidate assets. That includes revoking his administrative powers at your construction firm and notifying your banks. Second, we file a protective measure preventing any unauthorized transactions on your South Carolina property. He picked up my phone, still displaying the photographs I'd taken, and examined each image with meticulous care. Third, he continued, we gather enough legal evidence to challenge any claim they try to make about your mental clarity. And fourth, we establish new estate directives that ensure your assets cannot be misused or prematurely transferred. I let his words sink in. They felt heavy, but also strangely comforting. Someone was finally placing structure around the chaos. And what about the preliminary sales contract? I asked. Leonard tapped the document on the screen. It is invalid. Michael had no legal authority to represent you. But attempting to do so, especially with monetary transfers already initiated, constitutes document falsification. He paused, leveling his gaze at me. You need to decide whether you want to pursue criminal charges. I inhaled deeply. I had lived a long life believing that justice could be achieved without cruelty. But this wasn't cruelty, this was consequence. And consequences were necessary. Not yet, I said. There's a different path I want to take first. Leonard nodded, as if he had expected that. Then we will build a civil strategy that places pressure on him without immediate prosecution. A controlled counterattack. The phrase settled nicely in my mind. A controlled counterattack. We spent the next 2 hours drafting documents. Revocations. Amendments. Notifications. Each signature I placed carried the weight of both heartbreak and resolve. Leonard slid one final document across the desk. This, he said, removes Michael entirely from any managerial role or administrative access within your company. He will no longer sign contracts, authorize payments, or access accounts. Effective immediately. For a moment, I hesitated, not because I doubted the decision, but because I could almost hear the echo of a younger Michael laughing beside me as we reviewed blueprints in the office. The son I once believed would follow in my footsteps. But that son was gone. I signed the document. Then Leonard made the call to my corporate bank, verifying the revocations. I sat silently, listening as he informed them that unauthorized activity had been detected and that emergency restrictions needed to be placed. After that, he called the realty firm that had issued the appraisals. Yes, he said firmly, Mr. Harris is the rightful owner, and no authorization was granted to his son. Cease all contact and suspend any proposed sale. I watched the resolve in Leonard's movements and felt my own spine straighten. I was not helpless. I was not alone, and I was certainly not finished. Next, we turned to the condominium itself. Leonard advised listing it for sale immediately, but at a higher valuation, partly to ensure I benefited from the market and partly to send a message. When Michael eventually learned that the property he tried to seize had been placed into a separate investment account, one he would never touch, he would understand the sharpness of the blade he had unsheathed. Before I left Leonard's office, he asked me one more question. Gregory, he said gently, I must ask for the sake of clarity, do you want reconciliation or a resolution? There was a long pause. Resolution, I answered. My children decided long before Christmas Eve that I was expendable. I simply decided they were mistaken. As I stepped back into the winter cold, snowflakes drifted down, edging the sidewalks in pale silver. I felt strangely alive, a man walking through the ruins of a former life, but carrying the tools to build a new one. Because that morning, everything had become clear. My family had schemed quietly, but I would respond decisively, and the first blow would land sooner than they imagined. I did not need to wait long for the first ripple of consequences to reach my son. It happened that very afternoon, barely hours after Leonard had completed the final legal notifications. I was sitting at my dining table with a mug of hot spiced tea, letting the steam warm my hands, when my phone began vibrating violently against the wooden surface. Michael's name filled the screen, not calmly, not with his usual patient politeness, but urgently, as if the phone itself knew the call carried panic. I let it ring twice before answering. Dad! His voice cracked in a way that betrayed complete loss of composure. Dad, are you there? Yes, Michael, I replied evenly. I am here. I just received a call from a realty agency saying the South Carolina condo is listed for sale. They said you contacted them directly. I thought this had to be a mix-up, some clerical error, or maybe you forgot to tell me something. There is no error, I said. The property is for sale. Silence. A deep, weighted silence, thick enough to taste. Dad, why wouldn't you mention something this important first? Why would the agency know before I did? We've always discussed these things. We had an understanding. My jaw tightened. No, Michael, we did not have an understanding. You had an expectation, a false one. Another stretch of silence followed, sharper this time. Dad, I think we need to talk in person. I'm coming over. Very well, I said. I'll be here. I ended the call and moved to the window overlooking the street. I wanted to see his body language before he saw me. Years of working with contractors, investors, and unpredictable partners taught me that a man's truest intentions appear on his face before he composes himself. 40 minutes later, Michael's dark blue SUV skidded slightly as it pulled to the curb. He stepped out with jerky movements, running a hand through his hair the way he did when cornered. He slammed the door harder than necessary, then marched toward my porch with the determined gait of someone preparing for confrontation rather than conversation. I opened the door before he could knock. His eyes were wild, not angry, yet more like frantic confusion scrambling for a foothold. Dad, he said, pushing past the threshold without waiting to be invited. What is happening? Why did you revoke my access at the company? Why is the condo being sold? Why did the bank call me asking about irregular activities on the business account? He spoke too fast, like a man trying to outrun his own guilt. Sit down, Michael, I said. He paced instead, rubbing his temples. This doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. It feels like you're punishing me for something I didn't even do. I tilted my head, studying him the way one examines a cracked mirror, trying to determine whether the fractures can be repaired or whether the entire thing is too damaged to keep. Michael, I said carefully, you know precisely what you did. His shoulders stiffened. Dad, did you go through my office? Yes. He froze. For a moment, his eyes flickered with something close to fear. What exactly did you see? I saw enough, I replied. Enough to understand your intentions. Enough to see the lengths you were prepared to go. Enough to know you justified it all to yourself. He swallowed hard. Dad, I can explain, Dash. Then sit, I told him again. This time he obeyed, collapsing onto the sofa as though his bones had softened. He opened and closed his hands repeatedly, a nervous tic from childhood he'd never shaken. All right, he said quietly. Tell me what you think I did. No, I said. Tell me. Tell me what you were planning. He stared at the carpet for a long moment, breathing unevenly. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled with a mixture of defensiveness and shame. Dad, you have to understand. Jenna, and I felt boxed in. You have always been generous, yes, but your involvement, your control, your oversight, everything in our life, somehow, leads back to you. Every choice feels supervised. Every decision weighed against your approval. His voice wavered, but grew sharper. We thought, maybe if we found a way to encourage you to step back just a little, you might finally see that it's time to let us stand on our own. I encouraged independence, I replied. I supported your careers, your home, your children. At which point did that become a burden? When it never stopped, he said. When your help came with invisible strings. When your presence overshadowed everything we tried to do. There was again that word, overshadowed. I stood still, letting his explanation unravel. And so, I said quietly, your solution was to lie about canceling Christmas, to create a scenario where I would feel pushed aside, to take property appraisals behind my back, to prepare legal measures in case you wanted to challenge my competence. Does that sound like independence to you? His face flushed. Dad, it wasn't like that, Dash. It was exactly like that. He buried his face in his palms. Jenna, she said this was the only way. She said we needed to secure the future for Lily and Mason. She said you were too stubborn to have a conversation that might change anything. I exhaled slowly. So she convinced you to deceive me rather than speak to me. No, he said weakly. I convinced myself. His voice cracked again, but this time from something deeper fear of consequence, not guilt. I walked closer and stopped directly in front of him. Calm, controlled, unyielding. Michael, I said, you broke something you cannot repair with excuses, but you will learn exactly what comes next. He looked up, panic widening his eyes. What are you going to do? What I must, I replied. Michael's eyes darted around the room as if searching for a version of this moment where he still had control, where the truth had not yet surfaced. But the truth was here, standing in front of him, and there was nowhere left for him to hide. Dad, if you think I was trying to hurt you, Dash. I do not think, I said quietly. I know, because the evidence speaks for itself. His jaw tightened. What evidence? I walked to my desk, the same mahogany desk I had used to negotiate deals that built my entire company from dust, and retrieved a thick folder. Not the original one from his office, that I had returned to its drawer. This was a curated collection. Photographs, screenshots, copies of documents, every critical page. As I set the folder on the coffee table between us, Michael's breath caught. Recognition flashed across his face like lightning over dark water. Dad, please, he whispered. Let me explain before you assume the worst. I am not assuming, I replied. I am concluding. I opened the folder and revealed the first sheet, a printed copy of the preliminary sales contract he had signed with the coastal realty firm. His signature, his handwriting, his fabricated declaration of authority. Tell me, I said, tapping the page lightly, at what moment did I grant you the legal power to sell my condominium? Michael swallowed. It wasn't final. I didn't intend, Dash. You paid a deposit. I slid forward the second page. A transfer record showing the earnest money he had sent, also from business funds. This alone, I continued, is enough to qualify as document falsification. He clenched his fists. I wasn't going to go through with it without speaking to you. But you already had gone through with the first steps, I said. And you never intended to speak to me. You intended to corner me. His voice cracked. Dad, that's not fair. No. I leaned forward slightly. What wasn't fair was you lying to me about a canceled Christmas. What wasn't fair was you planning to take what I have earned while pretending everything was fine. I held up the next document, a letter addressed to an estate attorney, inquiring about legal grounds for asset transfer in cases of diminished mental clarity. Michael's face drained of color entirely. Dad, he whispered, please. That letter was theoretical, Dash. No, it was strategic. I pointed at the handwritten notes in the margin. Rachel must testify. Collect examples of forgetfulness. Medical evaluation required. These are not theoretical musings. They are instructions. For others. Against me. His breath quickened. I was trying to protect the family, he insisted, though the argument sounded weak even to his own ears. Jenna said, if something ever happened to you, Dash. Nothing happened to me, I said sharply, except that my own son decided I was in the way. Michael's shoulders sagged, as though the weight of the truth finally pressed him down. But then suddenly, irrationally anger flared in his expression, like a match struck too close to gasoline. You never let us breathe, he burst out. You controlled everything, every decision about the house, about the kids' schooling, about our finances. Even when you meant well, it suffocated us. You treated me like a child who couldn't take a single step without your guidance. I let him finish. I didn't interrupt. I wanted every word to spill out so I could examine it fully. When he finally fell silent, breathing hard, I asked, and your solution to this, supposed suffocation, was to betray me? He lowered his gaze. I didn't see any other way. There was always another way, I said. You simply chose the one that served you best and hurt me most. He covered his face with both hands. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he muttered. But it did go this far, I said, because you intended it to, because you believed I was old enough, fragile enough, and alone enough to manipulate. His hands fell away abruptly, and he stared at me with something between defiance and despair. Dad, you don't understand what it's like, he said. To be almost 40 with 2 kids, a mortgage, responsibilities, and still feel like your entire life depends on your father's approval. Jenna kept saying that if we didn't do something, our marriage would suffocate. And did you tell Jenna, I asked evenly, that I helped you purchase that house? That I covered part of your down payment? That I paid for Lily's tutoring when she struggled in math? That I loaned you money interest-free during the pandemic? His lips tightened, but he said nothing. Dependence is not a chain I forced on you, I continued. It is a rope you clung to until you wanted to cut it and take it with you. Michael looked up sharply. Dad, I never wanted to steal. I wanted Dash. You want to control, I finished. And you believe the only way to gain it was by eliminating me legally, emotionally, and financially. His expression darkened less in anger, more in recognition that his intentions were laid bare, with no chance of being rewrapped in nicer words. For a moment, a faint tremor went through him. A man realizing the ground beneath him was no longer solid. Finally, he whispered, What happens now? I closed the folder gently, as though sealing a chapter. Now, I said, you face the consequences of your actions, without the luxury of pretending they were born from noble intentions. He blinked. Consequences what kind? You will understand soon enough, I replied. There was no threat in my tone, only certainty. The certainty of a man who had reached the end of forgiveness. Michael sat hunched on the edge of the sofa, fingers curled together so tightly his knuckles blanched white. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, not physically, but in stature, in spirit, as if the scaffolding of his self-assurance had been stripped away overnight. What kind of consequences, Dad? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I walked back to my desk, retrieved a second folder thicker, more formal, and placed it on the coffee table between us. The thud it made when it landed might as well have been a judge's gavel. These, I said calmly, are the consequences. Michael's breath stuttered. Dad, what is all this? I opened the folder slowly, deliberately, letting each document speak before I did. First, I said, sliding the top sheet toward him, is the revocation of all your administrative privileges at Harris & Sons Construction. Effective immediately. His eyes widened. What? No, Dad, you can't fire me. That's my livelihood. That's my income. I worked there for years, Dash. You work there under the assumption of trust, I replied. Trust that you violated when you used company funds to stage your private schemes. He shook his head violently. Dad, please. My salary and my benefits, I need them. We could talk about this. We can reset boundaries, Dash. You already had boundaries, I said. You chose to cross them. I took out the next document. This is a formal notice of termination. You will return the company vehicle, the credit cards, the office keys, and all electronic devices by Friday. His mouth fell open, stunned. Friday, he echoed. That's Dad. That's only 4 days from now. How am I supposed to dash? I'm not interested in your logistical difficulties, I said. You created this crisis long before today. He ran both hands through his hair, gripping the back of his head as though trying to hold himself together. Dad, please. I have a family. Lily and Mason Dash. Your children will not starve, I said. You are capable of finding work. You have education. You have experience. Many men your age support families without needing to deceive their fathers. The next document slid across the table. This, I continued, is the cancellation of the monthly family support I have provided you since Lily's birth. His expression crumpled. That money is how we stay afloat, he whispered. It covers half our bills. Jenna will lose her mind. Dad, this isn't just punishing me, you're punishing my entire family. No, I corrected quietly. You punish your family when you risk their stability by engaging in fraud. I lifted the next document, perhaps the most devastating of all. This, I said, is the legal renunciation you will sign. It states that you relinquish any claim to my assets while I am alive. You will not inherit the company, the properties, or any financial holdings. Not now. Not in the future. Michael shot to his feet. No, absolutely not. Dad, that's too far. I held his gaze. You attempted to take those assets without my consent. I am simply ensuring you cannot try again. He stared at me, horrified. Dad, you cannot erase me from the will. I can, I replied. And I have. He staggered backward, one hand gripping the back of the sofa to steady himself. You're going to ruin me, he said, voice cracking. Ruin my family. All because of one mistake. One mistake. I repeated, my tone sharper now. This was not a mistake, Michael. A mistake is forgetting a meeting. A mistake is misplacing paperwork. What you did was calculated, coordinated, and malicious. He pressed both hands to his face. His shoulders shook. Dad, I was desperate. Jenna kept saying we'd never have a life of our own if we didn't take action. Everything we do somehow loops back to you, your help, your approval, your influence, Dash. I raised a hand. Stop. He fell silent. Desperation is not an excuse to betray your father. And if Jenna encouraged this, then she should share in the consequences. But right now, we are talking about you, not your wife. He dropped heavily back into the sofa, tears filling his eyes. Dad, is there anything I can say that will change your mind? I studied him, this grown man who once clung to my leg as a toddler, who I taught to ride a bicycle, who I carried on my shoulders during 4th of July parades. And yet now he was a stranger who had plotted my downfall with careful precision. No, I said, there is nothing. His tears spilled. You're going to throw away our entire relationship. You did that, I replied gently, when you chose ambition over loyalty. I tapped the pen that lay beside the documents. You will sign these, I said, and then you will leave my home. He stared at the papers for a long, shaking minute. His breath rattled. His eyes darted between me and the pages as though hoping one of us might change. I didn't. At last, his trembling hand reached for the pen. One signature, then another, then a third. Each one felt like the closing of a door that would never open again. When he finished, he dropped the pen as though it had burned him. His voice came out hoarse. Is there any chance at all that one day things will go back to the way they were? I looked at him steadily. When you explored declaring me incompetent, I asked, did you imagine we would ever go back to the way things were? The silence that followed was answer enough. I gathered the documents, placed them back into the folder, and stood. You may leave now, Michael. He hesitated at the doorway, his figure framed by the winter light outside, small, dim, uncertain. Dad, he said one last time, voice breaking, please don't hate me. I do not hate you, I said, but I no longer know you. He lowered his head and stepped out into the cold. When the door closed behind him, the echo lingered long after he was gone. The silence that followed Michael's departure did not feel peaceful. It felt heavy, an echoing weight settling over every corner of my home. Every picture frame on the wall, every memory I once believed was immune to corrosion. I remained standing by the door for several minutes, listening to the fading sound of his SUV pulling away, its tires grinding softly against the snow. I had expected anger, perhaps even relief, but what washed over me instead was something quieter, a profound, almost ancient sadness. The kind of sadness reserved for losses that have no funeral. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grain in the wood while I gathered the strength to process what had just occurred. A father is never prepared to sever the tie with a child, no matter how thick the rope of betrayal. But the quiet lasted less than half an hour. My phone buzzed again. Rachel, my daughter's name, lit the screen, glowing in the dim kitchen like a spark floating atop dark water. I knew exactly why she was calling. Michael must have already dialed her in panic, spinning his own version of events. I let the phone vibrate for several seconds, then answered. Dad, she said, without so much as a greeting. Michael is in shambles. He just called me sobbing. What is going on? He said you fired him from the company and kicked him out of the house. That is correct, I replied evenly. Why? Her voice sharpened immediately. You can't just do something like that without a reason. I had a reason, I said. Several. Her tone grew tight, defensive. Dad, he told me you misunderstood everything. That you thought he was doing something behind your back, but it was just research. He wasn't going to take anything dash. Rachel, I interrupted calmly. Were you aware of the property appraisals? Silence. A heavy, revealing silence. Were you aware, I continued, that Michael had drafted a preliminary agreement to sell my condominium, using my business funds, without my authorization? She inhaled sharply. Dad, I think you're exaggerating what those documents meant. He never intended dash. And were you aware of the inquiries into mental competency evaluations? Into accelerated asset transfers? Into establishing testimonies that I was losing clarity? Another, even longer silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was painfully gentle, as if she were trying to soothe a confused patient. Dad, those were just hypothetical possibilities. Families discuss things like that. You're getting older. We were just thinking ahead. Nobody wanted to hurt you. Her words mirrored Michael's so closely they could have been rehearsed. Rachel, I said softly, I need you to come to the house. Now. Dad, I can't. The kids have activities, and Owen is out running errands. This is not a request, I said. It is necessary, and if you don't come, I will assume your involvement is deeper than you admit. In that case, my next call will be to Leonard, and you will be included in the legal actions. Her breath hitched audibly. Dad, what legal actions? Come, I repeated. You have 1 hour. I ended the call. The next 60 minutes were long and oddly meditative. I sat in the living room, folders still on the table, the snow outside, swirling in slow, hypnotic spirals. I knew it was coming, another wound. But wounds, at least, are honest. Deception is the far more dangerous infection. Rachel arrived 45 minutes later, with Owen close behind her like a silent shadow. She walked in with urgency, but also with an unmistakable tension in her expression, eyes darting, shoulders tight, lips pressed thin. Dad, she began sharply, this is spiraling out of control. We need to calm down and talk this through. I gestured to the sofa. Sit. She crossed her arms. I'd rather stand. Sit, I repeated. She sat. Owen followed hesitantly, perched at the edge of the cushion as though expecting violence. His discomfort was almost palpable. He was a man who disliked conflict and had married into a storm he hoped never to navigate. I reached for the folder on the table and placed it in front of Rachel. Her jaw tensed. What is that? She asked. Your involvement, I said. I wasn't involved, she snapped instantly. Dad, you're acting paranoid. Whatever you think I did, you're misunderstanding dash. I opened the folder and pulled out a printed screenshot of a message she had sent Michael 2 weeks before Christmas. Dad is becoming more isolated. Maybe we should consider the legal option we discussed. Rachel's lips parted. Her eyes darted to Owen, then back to me. Dad, that message is out of context. Then explain the context, I said. Explain in what situation it is reasonable for a daughter to consider declaring her father incompetent. She stared at the page, her face draining of color. I didn't mean it literally, she whispered. I was frustrated. Michael had been venting. He made it sound like he refused to delegate anything. I was just trying to support him. By supporting a conspiracy? I asked. Her head snapped up. It was not a conspiracy. Dad, we were concerned about your future, about your health. You've been more withdrawn. Lately, you barely attend family outings anymore, Dash. That, I said, is because your invitations have grown fewer and fewer. She flinched. I took out the next document, a chart labeled Projected Asset Allocation After Transfer of Control. Her eyes widened again. Dad, I didn't make that chart. That was Michael. But you approved it, I said. Your initials are right here. Trembling, she pressed both hands to her forehead. Dad, please, this is all being twisted. We never intended to hurt you. We just Dash. You just want to control, I said. You just wanted to make decisions without my involvement. You wanted to benefit from my assets without my consent. You wanted to exclude me from Christmas because my presence didn't fit your plans. She shook her head. That was Jenna's idea. Yet you agreed to it, I replied. And you went to the dinner. You toasted. You celebrated. You smiled while I sat alone. Tears sprang to her eyes. Dad, we didn't think you'd ever find out. That sentence struck me harder than any blow. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the implication. They didn't regret what they did. They regretted being caught. Owen finally spoke for the first time. Gregory, I think there's been misunderstanding on all sides, Dash. I turned to him. Owen, I have no interest in your mediation. This is between me and my daughter. He went silent. Rachel wiped her cheeks. Dad, what happens now? The same thing that happened with your brother, I said. You will accept responsibility, or you will accept consequences. Her face paled. Consequences? You mean what you did to Michael? Yes, I said. Exactly that. Her breathing quickened. Dad, please don't do this to us. You did this, I replied. You chose this path. She looked down at the fold of the weight of her own choices staring back at her in black ink and cold print. Rachel stared at the documents in front of her as though they were glowing coals. She wouldn't touch them, wouldn't look at them for more than a heartbeat. Every time her eyes drifted toward the evidence, she recoiled, as if the truth might burn through her skin. Dad, she whispered, voice small and strained. I never meant for any of this to spiral like this. You keep saying that, I replied softly. But nothing spirals unless someone sets it rolling. Her hands trembled in her lap. Owen placed a hand on her shoulder, but she shook him off, her distress tightening into a new kind of tension, something close to indignation. You're acting like we planned a heist, she snapped suddenly. Like we're criminals. When all we did was talk about possibilities. Families discuss estate planning all the time. I held her gaze. Estate planning does not require secrecy, or lies, or staging situations to push me out of the picture. She swallowed hard. Dad, nobody was pushing you out. You excluded me from Christmas, I said calmly. You sat at that table. You toasted. You smiled. And not one of you felt even a flicker of guilt. Her eyes darted downward. Jenna said Dash. I'm not interested in what Jenna said. Rachel flinched. Tell me what you believed. For a long moment, she seemed caught between the instinct to protect herself and the instinct to tell the truth. Finally, her shoulders slumped. I believe that maybe it would be easier for you, she whispered. Easier if you didn't have to carry every responsibility, every decision. You don't see it, Dad, but everything in this family revolves around you. It always has. And you resent that? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded barely, but enough. Sometimes, she admitted, you've always been strong, always decisive, always involved. You show up to help before anyone even asks. You fund everything. You fix everything. You know every detail of our lives. And yes, some part of me spent years feeling like a child in your shadow. She wiped at a tear angrily, as if furious at herself for shedding it. But that doesn't mean I wanted to hurt you, she said. I just wanted space. I wanted the chance to make decisions without feeling like you were evaluating them. I listened. Not coldly, there was no ice in my heart for my daughter. But listening does not mean agreeing. And the solution, I asked quietly, was to consider stripping me of my legal autonomy, to explore ways to argue I was losing clarity. We were scared, she said sharply. You're getting older. You live alone. What if something happened and we weren't prepared? What if Dash? You were not preparing for emergencies, I interrupted. You were preparing for convenience. Her cheeks reddened. That's not fair. It is perfectly fair, I replied. You were not concerned about my well-being. You were concerned about your access. She clenched her jaw. Dad, why can't you see that we were trying to help? We don't want to fight with you. We want harmony. You want harmony, I said, as long as it bends in your direction. Her eyes hardened. That's not true. You're twisting everything. No, I said. I am clarifying everything. I reached into the folder again and pulled out a sheet listing the financial assistance I had provided her family in the last several years' tuition help, emergency funds, home repairs, support during Owen's unemployment period. Rachel's face went pale. Dad, why did you write all that down? I didn't, I said. Leonard did. Because transparency matters when deceit tries to hide. She stared at the sheet, stunned. We were always grateful, she murmured. Gratitude does not excuse betrayal, I replied. You accepted my support, but when it came time to respect my agency, you were willing to sign away. Her tears returned slower this time, weighted with realization. What happens now, Dad? She asked hoarsely. What are you going to do to me? I'm going to give you the same opportunity one gave your brother, I said, to accept responsibility or face consequences. What consequences? She whispered. You will no longer receive the monthly support I have been providing, I said. That ends immediately. Rachel gasped. Dad, no. Please, we rely on that. With the kids' activities, our mortgage Dash. Then you will adjust, I said. Like every other adult who must live within their means. Her voice cracked. Are you trying to ruin me? No, I said. I'm refusing to let you ruin me. She shook her head again, desperate now. Dad, if you cut that support, we'll fall behind on payments. Owen's hours fluctuate. I don't know if we can manage. You will manage, I said. Because you must. She stared at me, disbelief and panic swirling in her eyes. And I continued, you will also sign a legal waiver. Her breath stilled. A waiver, she whispered. The same as Michael's? Yes. You will relinquish all future claims to my assets while I am alive. Her hands flew to her mouth. No, Dad. No. Please. That's too much. You considered removing me from control entirely, I said. This is merely a response. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. Dad, please. I didn't mean to dash. You meant to participate, I said. And you did. She broke then, her shoulders curling inward, sobs trembling out of her like a child caught in a storm she could not outrun. Dad, we're your children, she cried. How can you do this to us? I felt the ache in my chest deep, ancient, human, but not enough to change what must be done. You are my children, I said gently, but you used that position to justify taking what was not yours. And now you will learn that love does not entitle you to ownership. She wiped her face with shaking hands. Dad, what if we try to fix this? What if we rebuild trust? What if Dash? You cannot rebuild trust, I said, by asking me to forget the blueprint of betrayal. Her tears slowed. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Is there any chance at all, that things will not end like this? I looked at her for a long moment, my daughter, my pride once upon a time, the little girl I carried on my shoulders through summer fairs, whose laughter once filled my home like warm sunlight. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who made her peace with excluding her father from his own family. No, I said at last. There is no chance. She inhaled shakily. Owen placed a hand on her back, guiding her upright. When she stood, she looked smaller, like betrayal had carved pieces of her away. She turned toward the door, then paused. Dad, she whispered, someday you'll regret this. Perhaps, I said, but not as much as I would regret letting it continue. She left without another word. The door closed. The silence returned. And this time it felt final. A full year has passed now, and I sit by the window of my new apartment overlooking the old heart of Milwaukee, where the river glimmers like a strip of polished silver. The silence here is different, no longer hollow, but peaceful, earned. I think often of the night everything broke, and I have learned this. A family can wound a man deeper than any stranger, but it cannot define the rest of his life unless he allows it. I chose not to, and in choosing that, I reclaimed myself.